The following program is a PodcastOne.com production.
From Hollywood, California, by way of the Broken Skull Ranch, this is the Steve Austin Show.
Give me a hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Now, here's Steve Austin.
All right, sitting here talking to Shane Douglas over here at 316 Gimmick Street, my location. Shane, where are you coming from today? Where are you at?
I'm in Pittsburgh, a little bit north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it's rainy and dreary here today, but life's good.
Man, I tell you what, it was real interesting. I'd been wanted to talk to you for a long time. And if you go back to, our careers back in WCW, and I guess we kind of briefly were in the same place, same time in ECW, and it's not going to be a smoke-blowing session, but you and I, as soon as I met you, and then we all of a sudden started working together, and we started feuding when Flying Brian and I started the Hollywood Blondes, and you and Ricky Steamboat were an established tag team, but, man, we always got along right off Jump Street, and we always had a blast working with each other in the ring. And I've always respected, your work in the ring and the promos. And I really want to get to a promo section later on in the conversation. But then along the way, you really hit some hard times during your run in ECW or coming out of ECW. But there was just a period of, normally in an interview, you kind of talk with someone and shoot the breeze and kind of get all relaxed. But with that being said, you and I have been on the phone for about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes just shooting a breeze while you got into better reception. But about a week ago, I interviewed a guy named Chris Bell. He made Bigger, Faster, Stronger. It was a documentary about steroids. And currently, he's working on one right now. I think it's going to come out probably this week. It's called Prescription Thugs, and it's talking about all the problems with people getting hooked on prescription drugs and all the problems. And he himself was really bad off on the OxyCodone. And so I really wanted to jump right into the thick of things with your battle with OxyCodone some years ago. I know you've been clean for probably 8 years or so.
10 years.
10 years.
Almost. Coming up on 10 years. Yes, sir.
Okay, let me ask you something, because I always take full responsibility for everything that I put into my body. But I remember when I got into the business of pro wrestling, Shane, man, I was just a young punk kid in North Texas and Denton. And I got in a car with someone who shall remain nameless, and we were driving to Oklahoma. And all of a sudden this person says to me, "Hey, you want a Vike?" And I said, "Well, what's a Vike?" "It's a Vicodin. It's a pain pill." I said, "Well, what does it do?" "Well, it can kind of give you a little buzz." Well, so I took my first pain pill. I never got hooked on pain pills, but I certainly took my share of them back in the day. And so, it's just like you get introduced to so many things in the business of pro wrestling. But how did you, when you first got into the business and you broke in about 1982, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so before you got onto the bad OxyCodone problem, what was your introduction just as far as to the drug culture that went with pro wrestling back in the day? And as I say that, I know the whole WWE system with the drug wellness program and all the stuff like that. I'm not speaking of anything current day. I'm talking about two old cats, you and I, talking about what it was back in the day.
Well, for me, Steve, it was when I broke in with Dominic DeNucci and, to some lesser extent, Bruno Sammartino, the business was very different then. I can't honestly say I've even ever seen Bruno or Dominic even tipsy. They drink wine, maybe a glass of beer here and there, but, it was just very foreign to me. And I was the kid, you're about the same age, maybe a little, I think you're a little bit younger than me, I believe, I'm not sure, but to me, I grew up in the era of Karen Ann Quinlan, who was a chick that went back in the 70s, I think about 75, 76, 77. She had gone to a party, drank some beer and took some pills, ended up in a coma for the rest of her life until they took her off life support, some like a decade or two later. Horrible story. And I always knew that with my luck, I'd be the jackass that would happen to, So I grew up, I was the kid that never smoked pot in my life. I just, drugs, I'm not, sitting there trying to preach from any kind of pulpit or anything. Drugs was never my deal. I was good with a 6-pack of beer and probably have a couple of those left over when I was done, not even a heavyweight at that. And but when I got into wrestling, especially ECW, and I don't for a second blame this, Paul Stanley said one time in an interview from KISS, he said, don't bitch, if you want to be a politician, don't bitch when you have to wear a tie. And, to go on my soapbox for a second, I think it's disingenuous, all these NFL players and NHL players now coming back years later and saying, well, geez, I got, a concussion when I was playing football, or I got hurt playing. Come on, man. You knew coming out of Denton. I knew coming out of New Brighton, Pennsylvania, that getting into professional wrestling, it wasn't a likelihood, it was a certainty that we would get injured in the business.
Right.
We still wanted to do it and still loved it. But that said, getting into the business, you've achieved far higher heights than I ever did in the business, but you use yourself as the measuring stick, what you're capable of in the ring. And in ECW, I was sort of caught between two worlds, the old school and the new school. The old school in the sense that, being taught like you were, make your shots, you don't complain, it doesn't matter, just suck it up. And I took that to a mantra. I mean, that was, if this is what Bruno Sammartino did, then damn it, it's good enough for Shane Douglas. And, came with that mindset. And then came ECW, where we had elevated the action to such a degree that there was a much greater chance for injury, and quite in fact, a lot of injury in ECW. And I took them, in the first 11 years of my career, I had some sprains, some bruises, and, stuff, maybe a couple stitches, nothing really serious. But in ECW, I suddenly was engaged in broken bones and ripped ligaments and, some pretty serious injuries. And the problems for ECW, you went through there, Steve.
Yeah.
We had a great roster, but we had a thin roster. We didn't have a deep bench. And so as a world champion and as the main guy in ECW, or one of the main guys, I took it very seriously that not just the fans and not just the guys sitting around the dressing room that were relying on us and their families, but for myself, coming from that culture of the old school that I broke in under, I would tell myself, screw it, I can go. And for a long time, I was able to. I was able to get into the ring and do it and suck it up. And then it reached a point where I won't say relying on, because I never got hooked on like the Vicodins, the Percocets. None of that was ever an issue for me. I could take them for a week or 2 or 10 days, whatever, not take them. I can't tell you how many times other guys who shall remain nameless had stolen them out of my bag and grabbed them out of my bag, and I didn't care. If I needed them, take them. But, when it came to OxyContin, it was in 1999, late 1999, a friend of mine, I was having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. I would lay there I didn't notice it at first, but I caught myself laying in bed and, loosening my neck up and my arms and the shoulders and then my legs, and then my legs over the end of the bed. I was like 38, 39 years old at the time. I thought, I'm way too young and in too good a shape to be feeling like this. So I had mentioned it to a friend of mine who was a pharmacist, and I said, this is crazy, what's going on? And he said, you probably have chronic pain syndrome. His wife at the time had fibromyalgia, and the story he told me that day was she's been on the couch for the last 2 years of her life. She's now back out playing golf every day. Go see this doctor. So I did, and this doctor gave me a 3-hour physical, head to toe. It wasn't like one of these, hey, Steve, how you doing? What's hurting? Okay, here's your prescription. It wasn't like that at all. He gave me a head-to-toe physical, and at the end he said, there's a new drug on the market. It's called OxyContin. It's a miracle drug. Well,
the old miracle drug routine, huh?
Yeah. But here was the catch to it. You said you used Vicodins and things in the past. When you take those, you still feel sore. You're just not paying attention because you've got a good little buzz on, but you're still in pain, maybe to a lesser degree, but still in pain. That first OxyContin pill I took, I was pain-free. It was like it erased the pain. And that first day, I remember I went to the gym and I worked out like an animal, went home and cut the grass and washed and waxed my ex-wife's car. 1 o'clock that morning, I'm downstairs painting the basement. I just felt so damn good physically. But I didn't notice like any kind of like Vicodin feeling, like that buzz or that euphoria. Right. It just didn't have any pain. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So then what did the dosage escalate to? I was talking to Chris Bell. I think he was telling me he was taking 20 OxyContin a day. Now, from my understanding, I think they came in different pill dosages, or 20, 40, or 60 milligram or whatever. But, how many of these things were you eating a day?
Well, it got to a ridiculous point. I'm thankful, especially with my 2 sons. I'm thankful to be here today because I shouldn't be. As often as we've seen in our business, at the end, I was thinking they're in 20 milligram increments, 20, 40, 20, they double, 20, then 40, 80, they call them big green monsters. And at that time, they had 160 milligram, big capital on the market. They just taken off the market because too many people were dropping dead, like I didn't give them a clue. But at the end, I'd get a prescription of them for 60, and it would last me a day and a half. I was taking 17 80-milligram OxyContin 3 times a day, so 51 a day.
Okay, so, man, you're taking that amount of pills. All of a sudden, man, as soon as you get your prescription filled, it's going to run out. So how were you able to keep facilitating the habit? Where were you getting all the pills from? Black market?
Black market, doctor shopping. You become a slave to it. You know, here I was a kid that had never done drugs in his life, and suddenly I'm spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on this hamster wheel trying to figure out, okay, I've got to go on the road for 3 days, so I'm going to need this many, and I've got to go see this doctor and this doctor and this doctor. It's just, insanity. I mean, they teach them to get off that crap. That it's all insanity, and I was insane as they come. I was just, trying to hold everything together, trying to hold a marriage that couldn't be saved together, trying to be a good father, trying to maintain a career, trying to keep it hidden from everybody, and out of the shame of it and the concern that I wouldn't be able to wrestle again, whatever. And here I am stuck on this hamster wheel, and what do you do?
Well, you had a similar story because Shawn Michaels mentioned, when he was kind of, and I don't know what pills he was doing, probably a lot of somas, but, I believe it was his son came up to him and says, "Oh, Daddy's tired again." You, in one of your interviews, said, I guess it was a period you were throwing up, you were sick, it was something going on, and your son came to you and said, "Oh, Dad, are you sick today again?" And all of a sudden, you put 2 and 2 together and realized, like, hey, the kid's smart. He knows what's going on here. And that was a big inspiration for you wanting to get off the stuff.
Yeah. Well, first, it happened, coincided, my second son, Caden, was born December 6th of 2005. And my younger son's birthday is April 6th, also the 6th. He was 4.5. He would be 5 in a few months. And he had been pretty oblivious up to this point. I would honestly, I would try several times every month to go cold turkey. I tried rapid opiate detox. I tried that buprenorphine garbage. I was trying anything and everything. What I wasn't getting was any kind of support. Everybody around me, at work I was being told, if you're taking pills, we're going to fire you. My wife was telling me, if you're taking pills, you'll never see your boys again. And this whirlwind was going on around me. I was just trying to get my nose up above the waterline. But my youngest son was about 2.5, 3 weeks old at the time. And Connor, my oldest boy, came walking in, and I was laying in the bed in another one of these, awful sicknesses that, I used to be, what's the word I want to use, unsympathetic.
Right.
People say, oh, you're going through, withdrawal, whatever. Okay, well, you deserve it or whatever. And now, having been through it, I've got more sympathy than anything else in the world for it, because you literally wish to die. And my older son, Connor, who was 4.5 at the time, came walking in weeks after my younger son was born. And he looked at me, he stood there for about 2 or 3 minutes just staring at me, and he said, I opened my eyes, and he said, "Dad, are you sick again?" And it was just like a punch in the mouth. It was the wake-up call that I needed. And I committed that second. Like, this is it. It's either going to kill me or I'm going to get off it. And I left home. I told my wife a lie that I was going on the road, and I left and went over to Orlando. I was living in Sarasota at the time. Went over to Orlando, checked into the hotel that TNA kept his boys in to sleep in, and paid for a week. Told the guy at the front desk I was going to be working on my book and I didn't want disturbed for any reason. Went over to Walgreens right across the parking lot and bought a roll of duct tape and duct taped the curtain shut. Took my last dose and laid down for what I was hoping would be, a quick, run and done. And I laid there for about 8 days in a puddle of my own puke and shit. Just too weak to get to the bathroom. But finally was able to kick it, thank God. And if you said right now, Shane, I'll give you $10 million to go through it again, I'd think about it for a second, but I'd definitely turn you down.
So what is it like when you're going through 50 oxycontins in 2 days and then you need a refill? I mean, are you just in a total state of euphoria? You stated before that it didn't have the same buzz that a Vicodin did. So, like, what did it do to your personality, and how did you function on a social level?
Well, I thought pretty well at the time. And again, that's the insanity of it. I was, it was apparent to everybody around me that something was wrong. They may not have known exactly what it was, but, people start to guess and they start to put 2 and 2 together, and suddenly it becomes not that you're hooked on a drug that a doctor prescribed to you, but that you're hooked on heroin or you're hooked on cocaine or you're a crack addict or something. for the record, I've never done an illicit drug in my life. I just never. Well, I'm lying. I've tried cocaine twice and didn't really like it. I mean, I should say I liked it, but I'm too damn much of a cheapskate to go out and spend $200-300 what I can get with a $6 six-pack, So, but it was. I thought everybody around me was oblivious, and obviously they weren't. And again, that's the insanity of it. But I was trying like hell to function to any level, and failing on all fronts.
Well, let's go to the ECW locker room just for a second, and I don't want to delve too much into your career there just yet, but let's go to the culture, the pre-show culture of the ECW arena, because I came briefly in there. Paulie gave me a call. I had a banged up tricep, but all of a sudden, I found my way into one of the cliques. And, man, there was stuff for whatever flavor you had, there was that flavor to be found. And, I've hooked up with a couple of guys. I was just cutting promos and really watching the shows. But certainly a lot of extracurricular activities going on there. Were you your run at that time that I came in, which is probably around 95, Shane. This was pre-Oxycontin, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. In '99, I started the OxyContin.
Okay, so where was your head at during this period? I mean, because this is where you really come alive. And again, not to go into that, but just to stick 5 more minutes with that locker room air that was going on. Were you involved in any other drugs at that time?
No, there was. I was doing some Nubane at the time, which is at that time my pharmacist would give me over the counter, and so in my head I was sort of analogizing it that it must be safe because I'm doing it over the counter. I had no trouble with it. I would take it a day and I wouldn't use it for a week, and I'd take it for a day or two and wouldn't use it for 2 weeks. But by and large, I was getting by. I was in incredible shape at that time. I was living my life in the gym. And you mentioned the cliques. The cliques was something that had started up right around that time. And to Paul's credit, he had tried, Paul Heyman, that is, to his credit, he had done the best he could to try to nip that in the bud. There was when it started getting, the camp started being set up, Paul pulled me and a couple of guys aside and said, look what's happening, and pointed it out. And we made it a conscious effort to, I would start going hanging with the Camp B, and Taz would start going hanging with Camp C, and Camp C would start hanging with Camp, D or whatever. Everyone was trying to cross reference because we really didn't want that poison in the dressing room, and for a while it was successful, but look, people tend to hang with the people they hang with.
Right.
It's if you're a seamstress, you're not going to hang out with boolers. It's just the way it works, and it worked its way into there as well. Guys
going to the ring in an impaired state there in ECW, guys being pretty straight. We're in the ring there, Shane.
Yep.
Safety factor. I mean, did you feel safe in the ring with the people you were working with?
Not everybody. I mean, it reached a point where me and several other guys had gone to Paul and said they wouldn't work with certain other people because what we were doing was risky enough. We were breaking bones and tearing ligaments just on the game of it, and suddenly it's ramping up. We're having Brian Lee and Tommy Dreamer at one point had a scaffold match where they were fighting over stacks of tables that were stacked on top of each other 40 feet in the air, and Brian Lee ended up having to take a bump off one of those. It was getting exponentially dangerous, more dangerous than it had been, and it was dangerous enough to begin with. And I think that's when the ECW formula hit the wall. Like, we had taken it as far as we could physically, and now we're having substances in the dressing room. There's a quick side story, I'll never forget it. It was comical as hell to me. I had just gotten back. I was supposed to still be in the hospital. This was after the '97 pay-per-view where Bam Bam threw me around like a rag doll, and both of us ended up in the hospital. He was pissing blood afterwards, and I had to have surgery on my elbow, and I cut the cast off. I was supposed to be in the hospital for like 4 or 5 days, and I cut the cast off after 2 or 3 days and left and went to make the ECW arena shot. And Taz was going to German suplex me that night. So I had a couple Percocets in my bag. This is a couple days after surgery. I take a couple Percocets, and unbeknownst to me, Paul's watching. So Paul calls me out of the dressing room and starts reading me the riot act, telling me, you're the leader in this dressing room and look what you're doing and, how are you supposed to set an example? And I about choked on my tongue because I pulled him back into the dressing room and I said, take a look at this dressing room. And in one corner, somebody was shooting Nubane. And in another corner, somebody was snorting cocaine. In another corner, somebody else was doing something else. And there were 4 or 5 guys out back smoking pot at the time. I was like, and you're gonna point out to me that I'm taking 2 doctor prescribed Percocet,
Yeah.
Sort of surreal.
Hey, let's finish up with this one. What was the final way that you ended up getting off the Oxycontins? Because I listened to you tell the story about going into that hotel room, and it was all a front, and you were still with TNA, and you couldn't crawl to the bathroom like you said. You'd piss and shitting on yourself. So, but you did end up checking into rehab to kick this stuff finally, right?
Yeah. When I left the hospital or the hotel, I think it was on the 7th or 8th day. I think it was 8 days I was in the hotel. And I started telling myself, man, you're just going to die in this room. You got to move. So
you kept saying you were waiting to like if 6 days would go by. Okay, tomorrow I'm gonna feel better. Day 7 would come by. You're looking for day 8 to feel better. You never felt any better. Why was that?
Never felt. Well, your body gets so. I'd been taking it for a little over 5 years at that point.
Oh, Jesus Christ! That long on that high of a dosage?
Yeah, well, it wasn't that high the whole time.
Okay, worked up to it.
That's what it excelled to the very end. But I mean, my receptors were saturated, and again, my medical school backing. Your body only makes what it needs, and so if it's getting something that's chemically similar to endorphins, which are your feel-good hormones, it stops making it. And so on the 8th day I left, made myself drive back home and just was trying to make myself move. But Steve, was like climbing Mount Austin or Mount Ararat or something. I was trying to get to the top of this mountain. I couldn't get there. It was just like an elephant on my back. And 6 weeks later, I still felt crappy as hell. I was, when you're sick, I always tell people when you're sick, you have bad flu, whatever. A couple of days from now, you might feel 10% better, and you're turning the corner.
Right.
I never felt any better. If anything, I was starting to feel worse. Less and less energy, and I had none to begin with. So about 5, 6 weeks after I left the hotel, I took myself down to Sarasota Memorial Hospital and went in and the emergency room, and I said, there's something wrong with me. I told them the whole story. I told them, straight shoot on everything. And they said, well, we're going to put you in the detox center. I said, I don't need detox. I'm detoxed for 6 weeks right now. Something's wrong with me. I thought I'd fucked my insides up.
Right.
And so they put me in the detox center for like a day or two, and then they realized that I wasn't needing to be detoxed. They put me in the hospital for 34 days. TNA had amazingly kept the story quiet. And there were 2 guys in the hospital, 2 orderlies, whose names slip me at the moment, but if they're listening to this, I want to thank them because they were huge Shane Douglas and ECW fans. And I asked them, I said, please, guys, I want to keep this under wraps. I wanted to get in there. Every day I was in the hospital, Steve, I expected somebody to turn, a reporter or somebody to turn that corner, and they didn't. TNA had kept it amazingly quiet, which is why whenever I went back, Dixie had asked me if I wanted to go public with it. And I told her that I did, that I felt there was a big story to be told there. And I knew that if it was happening to me, it was most certainly happening to other people. And if I could help in any small way to avoid what I had been through, I was 2 thumbs up for that.
Well, you said there was one good thing about, if there was one good thing about OxyContin, was that it had no acetaminophen, so it wasn't that damaging, I guess, to part of your internal organs. But what was it about it that the rehab was able to help you with? Did they put you on like Suboxone or a methadone type thing to wean you? Because, I mean, theoretically, you'd almost gotten yourself all the way clean. But when you checked in there, you still got all these shitty symptoms. Why did you continue to have the symptoms? What did they end up doing for you from a medical standpoint that you had not already gone through?
Well, it's a great question. They had the first thing was they tried to put me on that Suboxone, and I refused it. And then they talked about methadone, which I refused. And I would refuse. They kept coming in with all these different ideas, and I could, fuck that, no way, not doing it. And at that point, I was on the journey. And so for me, if it took a year, 5 years, I figured it took me 5 years to get myself to this point. If it takes me 5 years to feel great again, so be it. But I'm not going back to anything. I'm not getting reliant on anything else. And what they did, the most important thing they did for me in there was they made me comfortable with, I think it was Ultram. Your body mimics it. It's part of the reason, it's part of the insanity of addiction or physical, in my case, physical dependence, that your body begins to mimic the symptoms trying to get you to take that drug.
Right.
And so I was in a, like touching my skin hurt. There was about a week or 10-day period where I was just in agony. And had somebody put an oxycodone pill in front of my face, I'd have snorted it through my nose if I had to.
Right.
And so they kept me comfortable, and then from there we started talking about what I was going to do to be able to live the rest of my life pain-free, or managing the pain is probably a better way to put it.
Right.
And that's what I spent most of those 34 days doing, Steve, was putting together a plan that so far has worked very well, and has allowed me to. For me, it reached a point where, because I had never been the guy to take drugs, where I had gotten to the point where, I would say a good 6 to 12 months afterwards, they're always, you're driving down the road, and for no reason, a little voice in your head would say, you can go take some OxyContin, you're fine now. And I'd have to, just keep pushing that monkey back off of my back. But at about 12 months in, I would say, I stopped thinking about it. And, a lot of these guys, they'll count the number of days. They'll say, 1,322 days clean, or whatever it is. And to me, that was part of the, I've met a doctor, one of the pain management doctors that I work with now, had said there's a ritual, like a person that smokes, feeling a cigarette in their finger, flicking the ashes, putting it in their mouth, lighting it. There was a ritual to the whole pill-taking thing.
Right.
And so, when I got broken of that and put far enough behind me, it became a distant memory. I mean, as I talk about it today, it's like I'm talking about another person and another lifetime. It doesn't register like it was me, but it obviously was. And I'm thankful to be able to be talking about it today, because the first doctor that I met, when he asked me how much I was taking, I told him, and he said, "You're mistaken. You mean in a week, because there's never been a documented dose that high that didn't kill somebody."
Right.
And I said, "Doc, I'm not bragging to you. I'm telling you the gospel truth." Because my thinking, Steve, was for 5 years I tried to get off it my way, and I failed as spectacularly as you could possibly fail. And so they'd have told me to stand on your left foot and pick your nose and holler hooty hoo. I was going to do it because I was getting off that shit, and had a great team of doctors there that certainly helped me steer me in the right path.
I've heard, several tales of some of the boys give an outrageous number of pills, and it's just like, I'm like the doctor. It's almost hard to believe. So with everything that you put your body through in ECW, and we're going to get to that, but now, as we speak, are you on any kind of pain management system, or is it just you, Shane Douglas, going down the road doing your thing and in a different place?
No, I wish I could say that. I'm still on an extensive pain management system. A good friend of mine who used to wrestle, Cody Michaels, he's a chiropractor. I see him several times a month. I go to a good massage therapist here in town. His name's Christian, who does great sports massage, deep tissue massage. I do home traction. I've got a home TENS unit, and I do occasionally take, Ultram when it gets really bad. I just recently started taking a supplement from a company called It Works. A friend of mine gave it to me a couple months ago, and I thought, that's going to be more garbage like all of them are.
Right.
And I started taking it like today and yesterday and the day before. It's been really rainy here in Pittsburgh, and this is the kind of weather that would really get my pain levels up. And I'm feeling about 85-90% normal. So whatever it is I've been doing and everything I've been doing, I'm sticking to, because it's working, and my heart goes out to anybody that's on that path right now, because it's a hell of a fucking ride if you survive it.
These days when you get out of bed, Shane, sometimes I'm not a morning person. It takes me 2 big-ass cups of coffee to get out of bed. And when you were on OxyContin, before you got there, I mean, you were having a hard time getting out of bed. How is the wake-up process for you these days? What is your morning ritual? Because it seems like some of the guys that have been around for a while, and you lasted longer in the ring than I did, but what's your morning ritual? Just to get going, just to get functioning, and say, okay, world, I'm ready for you, because I'm pretty grouchy, and I'm not worth the shit until I have my couple cups of coffee and get going. But sometimes I need a crane to get out of bed, but that's only here and there. What's your process?
Yeah. Well, I've got the same horrible addiction. I get up every morning and I make a real strong cup of espresso, and that gets me started. To be honest with you, my mornings are pretty normal routine now. Other than I get up and do my coffee, and I take my morning supplements every morning. I take magnesium. I take just about every vitamin and supplement you can think of. But other than that, my boys give me the reason to get up and run. I am a morning person. I like getting up about 4:30 in the morning. Just to get you have the world to yourself. The phone ain't ringing, the computer ain't buzzing.
Dude, what time are you going to sleep if you're able to get up that early?
I'm getting up. I'm probably up to about 10, 11 o'clock. Usually at least till 11. Especially if my boys are over. My older son's usually up till about 11, and then I'll go in. But you know what I do now, Steve, is my day is structured like when my boys are at school or whatever. If I'm tired, if I'm sitting there and having trouble keeping my eyes open, screw it, I'd go shut everything off and go lay down for 20, 30 minutes, and that really recharges my batteries. I find if I sleep too long, if I let myself just sleep till I wake up, I'm actually more miserable than if I just take a 20, 30-minute nap.
I do the same thing, man. About that 3 p.m. mark, if I'm not on a job or something like that, and I start nodding off while I'm reading, because I have a hard time sleeping to begin with. But if I can nod off during the day organically or just naturally, then I'll allow myself to do that. And then I'll kick out, like you said, at about the 20-minute mark. It might only be 15, but that's kind of a recharge for me. But anyway, I'm talking to the franchise, Shane Douglas. I'm going to take a pause for the calls and get a word from our sponsors. I want to come back. We got the drug stuff out of the way, and I want to come back to the white meat babyface days. Actually, before those days, you coming out of Bethany College and growing up in that Pittsburgh area, obviously idolizing Bruno Sammartino, your decision, you're college educated. You got a degree in philosophy and history. So you decide to get into the squared circle. I want to come back and discuss these things with Shane Douglas.
The Steve Austin Show. The Steve Austin Show.
Hey, it's Adam Carolla from the Adam Carolla Show. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch and bet on games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball as well. Bet Online has NHL, MMA, and championship boxing, all your betting needs in one place. Head to Bet Online today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. So have some fun. Make these games and these events and these combat sports a little more interesting with Bet Online. Bet Online. The game starts here.
All right, here we are talking to the franchise, Shane Douglas. All right, Shane, break this down for me. You're growing up in the Pittsburgh area, going through high school. What sports are you playing?
When I was in high school, I wrestled the entire time through high school. I was wrestling at the school that I went to, New Brighton High School, didn't have a wrestling team. So I was wrestling at a club out of Warren, Ohio. My mother, bless her heart, used to take me to every single week. And but I was involved in, just about every other aspect of school. I was involved in, we were playing football, intramural, and we had a pretty extensive intramural program there. But wrestling was my sport of choice. In fact, it's coming up in September. Las Vegas is going to have the World Championships, and I plan on being there because it's. I hadn't been around it for the time I was a kid, but whenever I was about 3 years ago, my boys started wrestling again, and it reintroduced me to amateur wrestling, and I became hooked all over again. It was just it reignited all the fire in me that I had in the first place to get involved in wrestling in the first place, and so I'm looking forward to the World Championships coming up.
You're a bright guy, Shane. You go to Bethany College. You decide philosophy, history. as your choice of studies. Why did you pick that?
Well, it was public policy and management was my major, and minor was in management, and history obviously was a huge part of that. It was what I was interested in. But
what path were you choosing to go down at that time in your life? Because you ended up teaching there for a while, but there when you first got in, what was your directive? What was your goal? What were you going to do with that degree? Go teach?
My goal, no, it wasn't. I had never planned on being a teacher. My original goal was to work in government. You know, I had my plan. If I'd had a pencil at that point and could write my future, my plan was to graduate and go to either Harrisburg, the Pennsylvania capital, or D.C. to work, and had always endeavored to run for office at some point. I was one of those guys, one of those dorks that just loved the social sciences, and the reason I went to that, Steve, was I was going to be I always wanted to be a doctor, and I had a chemistry teacher in high school in 10th grade. His name was Mr. Plotbilski. He was a basketball coach, and he never, how do I put it without burying the guy? He liked to flirt with the girls in the classroom, which were all of our friends and girlfriends, and they would write their names on their test papers and go up and ask them a question and start to flirt with them during the tests, and they'd end up with A's. And I would struggle my ass off and struggled by with a C+. And my thinking at the time was not realizing good teaching to bad teaching. Hell, kid, if you can only get a C+ in high school chemistry, you sure as hell can't go to medical school.
Right.
And my next love was the social sciences, and I segued over to that. I watched my mother and father work, especially my mother. My dad was a railroader, worked a hard job, but he loved it. My mother worked in a medicinal plant that made tubes, or you get like an ointment at the pharmacy or something. She made those tubes. And bless her heart, she worked her ass off. And I used to go watch, like, a couple times I was able to go in and watch her work, and I thought, brother, I couldn't do that job.
Right.
I wasn't that tough. And, I knew from a young age, even though I was the first person in my family to go to college, I knew I was going to college because I wasn't going to do that. And so that was what took me to college and why I had segued into the social sciences and excelled at it. I graduated cum laude from Bethany, and, had I been anywhere near the student I became when I was preparing for medical school, I would have, probably been a summa cum laude. I look back at it now, but I had a hell of a lot of fun in college too, and wrestled the entire way through.
So you get out of college and you got your whole life ahead of you, and coming from a wrestling background during high school at the Ohio place you wrestled at, man, right. Obviously you were watching the business of pro wrestling.
Oh, I was a fan of professional wrestling from the time I was 4 years old. I can still remember I used to get in a shitload of trouble because I would watch studio wrestling out of Pittsburgh on Channel 11, which was called WIIC back then. And, of course, Bruno was on there, and DeNucci, and, a ton of all you name it. The started Ivan Koloff, Haystacks Calhoun. And I used to get in trouble because I had a Batman character, and Batman, of course, was on television at the time. And I used to put a towel around my neck with a safety pin, and before the show was over, I'd end up jumping off the couch with my brother and my sisters. And I'd never see the end of wrestling because I'd be in my bedroom getting punished. And then I stopped watching it until years later, whenever cable television finally came to Pittsburgh in 1976. I was 13 years old, and my dad, who I didn't know till after he died, was a 4-year letterman in wrestling in high school. He never ever mentioned that to me.
Wow.
And we got it, and WOR had WWWF on Saturdays at midnight. I can still remember sitting down with my dad. It was one of the few times I remember watching, because he rarely watched television, sitting down with him and watching a program. And the first segment I saw was Superstar Billy Graham behind a cage with the Grand Wizard doing a promo about Bruno. And, man, I was hooked. I mean, hook, line, and sinker, I thought that was the coolest fucking thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Explain to me the legend of Bruno Sammartino from a kid that grew up in the Pittsburgh area, because obviously I know who Bruno is, but I was down in South Texas. Wrestling was very regional back then, so, of course, I always heard of the legend of Bruno Sammartino, and, of course, I know all of his accomplishments, and, he was just a tremendous asset to the business, one of the biggest stars of all time. How over was the guy back then when you were a kid?
Well, I'll start current and go back. If I go up to Permani Brothers, which is a sandwich shop where you get the coleslaw and French fries on the sandwich, a famous sandwich shop up in the Strip District in Pittsburgh. If I go there tonight and I walk in, the first thing is, "Hey, franchise, how you doing?" And the second thing is, "How's the legend? How's Bruno Sammartino?" He could run for mayor of Pittsburgh today and win in a landslide.
Right.
Just a genuine nice guy. But in Pittsburgh, growing up, we had the Steelers, of course, and then there was a run with the Pirates the years before the Penguins ever got good. And we had Bruno Sammartino. He was part of that triumvirate of things that we paid attention to here in Pittsburgh, and he was a huge part of the cultural fabric that was Pittsburgh at that time.
So then, at what point do you say to yourself, "I've got to be a pro wrestler. I've got to find a guy to train me"? Ultimately, you find Dominic DeNucci, who also trained Mick Foley, probably about a year down the road after you come through. So what was it when the light went off in your head and said, "Hey, I got to do this"?
I was at it's crazy that you remember this stuff. I was at my sister's house, my sister and brother-in-law's house. I was babysitting for them. They both worked midnight shifts. And they had two young kids, my nephew and niece, Sammy and Stephanie, and they were 3-4 years old. They were about a year apart. And they were in sleeping. I was reading wrestling magazines. And they had a picture in the back where you could send in and get a mask of Mr. Wrestling 2. And I remember something about that article grabbed my attention. And right prior to that time, we had my friends and I had seen a picture in Pro Wrestling Illustrated of a kid that had got his picture in the paper or in the magazine because he had built this ring, and it was really sorry looking. The ropes were drooping, strings hanging off them, and there was a carpet for the mat. And my friends and I were all pretty handy. We thought, well, we can build a better ring than that. And so we did. We set out to build a ring, and a couple of weeks later, we've got this pretty impressive looking ring in the backyard, which we fooled around in for a couple of weeks. And then, so now what are we going to do with it? At the time, you're in the same age. There was a time when Muscular Dystrophy Association's got kids put on backyard carnivals to raise $5-10 to send in to MDA. And I had gone and met a woman named Angeline Paparella, who was a local chairwoman of the local chapter of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. This woman, Steve, was a courageous human being. She was a nurse who had contracted adult onset muscular dystrophy, was totally immobile but for a few fingers. And to say that woman worked tirelessly to defeat muscular dystrophy is an understatement.
Right.
She's, of course, long since been passed away, but when we went over to meet her, I was in 8th grade at the time, and my friends were in 7th. They were a year behind me. And I think she was so enamored by the idea of kids this age wanting to do something. We wanted to put on a backyard wrestling show.
Right.
And so she called me up one day and she said, there's a wrestler that lives locally. It's an Italian name. Well, of course, it's Bruno Sammartino. And she said, no, it's not Bruno. And she couldn't remember Dominic DeNucci's name, but she put Dinarini, Dominuni, or she's going through all these incarnations. I said, Dominic DeNucci, who was world tag team champ at the time with Dino Bravo. And she said, yeah, that's it. Dominic DeNucci. And she put me in touch with Dominic, who said that he'd make an appearance that day if he was in town. As fate would have it, he was in town that day, and he swung by, and I can still remember my mind's eye. I can still see him getting out of the car. He had this huge white LTD, and he got out. And I remember this thing as a kid in 8th grade, 13, 14 years old. I saw this huge, what looked like a massive chest getting out of the car, and he came down. What we had done at that time is, much like the kids do today. We had rehearsed our matches. We had we had written the script for each match.
God damn it, Shane, you're killing me. This is probably 81 or 80, and you're already scripting a match. This is not the Shane Douglas I knew in WCW. We were calling everything in the ring. Please continue.
But that's how we did it, and Dominic got involved in a couple of matches. I think he was really taken back, and seeing kids go out and really did a good job of putting on a show. We ended up drawing about 50 people to the show and drew a couple $100.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then after the show, we were out front of my friend's father owned the bar, and he allowed us to set this up at the back. We were out front taking a picture, a group photo. My brother-in-law took photos that day, and Dominic asked us how old we were. And I said, I'm 14, how old are you? And he laughed, and he said, you never ask a wrestler how old they are. And he told me that day he was 48. And my guess is he was probably lying to me then, but Dominic's still around and kicking, still in phenomenal shape, and one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life, and I'm blessed to have known him and been trained by him.
Long story short, what was his training camp like? You know, my time with Chris Adams, we were basically doing a lot of tumbling, a lot of flat back, stuff, slapping the mat, and just a modicum of chain wrestling. You know, maybe you're going to be the same story as mine, really is more on the job training. It was a foot in the door. I basically learned the basics, and I wasn't smartened up until my first match at the Sportatorium on live television. So how long was this camp? What were you guys focusing on?
Well, Dominic didn't have any length to his camp. You know, when you paid to go, which he never charged me. I'll tell you that story a little bit. But I would go. He had me get to the school early. I'd get there we started at 7 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays, and I'd get there about 5:30, 6 o'clock, and clean the school up and make sure everything was clean, the ropes were tight and the ring was cleaned out, that sort of thing. And he would start off, we would do a lot of calisthenics, a lot of running the ropes, a lot of stuff for wind. And then Dominic was real expensive on the chain wrestling because he had been a silver medalist in Olympic trials in 1956 for Italy.
Oh,
and
wow.
would have gone, except back then you had to pay your own way, and of course he came from a very poor family, didn't have money, that's why he emigrated. And so he was extensive on chain wrestling. And it was a natural for me because I had an extensive amateur background, and so it was a smooth transition for me. Although Dominic would he never roughed us up like I hear these stories of other people hear him at sort of break your leg or do this or do that.
Right.
Dominic never did that, but he'd rough you up just enough to let you know he was in charge.
Right.
And ran a pretty tight school. And fortunately, about a year later or so, Mick came, and we had a couple other guys around the school. A guy named Dave Kilbansky and a guy named a guy that became Cody Michaels, Mark Keenan. We had some pretty good people to work with there, and the four of us usually got in the ring. And I remember about 7, 8 o'clock at night, it'd be pitch black outside, and Dominic would tell us, "Get the fuck out of the ring! I got to get home." And we just really soaked it up. We loved it. We just indulged ourselves in professional wrestling.
So were you wrestling, doing local shows? I mean, because, or was UWF your first stop? And if so, how did you get there?
Well, UWF, I believe, was in 85. Through my college years, 82 to 86, until I left to go to UWF, I was wrestling on the weekends, not every weekend, but 2-3 times a month at least. Dominic would have shows or be connected to shows in Lorain, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, West Virginia, down in Charleston, and Fairmont, West Virginia. My first professional match was in Fairmont, West Virginia, Thanksgiving Day, 1982. And same thing. Dominic never smartened any of us up, and Mick Foley and I once Mick came, he always put me and Mick in the curtain jerk, the first match.
Yep.
And Mick and I are standing in the hallway at the Warren, Ohio. Strange how it goes full circle, back to Warren, Ohio again. And Mick and I are standing in the armory. We're standing in the hallway getting ready to go out for the match. And somebody yells kayfabe. Well, as silly as it might sound, I honestly thought, and so did Mick, that somebody was yelling for a woman named Kay. And, so we just kept right on talking. And
the two guys that are about to go out there and work a match together are watching the matches, and someone yells kayfabe. Okay, continue.
Yeah. Bruno Sammartino's in the dressing room, Johnny Valiant, the Samoans.
Oh, wow, hell of a crew.
Yeah, from Dominic and Bruno's generation. And somebody yells kayfabe again, louder and a little bit more terse. And Mick and I pay no attention to it.
Oh, my.
I remember thinking at the time, somebody's looking for this bitch named Kay and you can't find her, and they're going to be pretty pissed off here in a second. Dominic comes walking over with those big mitts of his and smacks us both in the ear and pulls us by the ear to the shower and goes, in his broken English, he's been here for longer than I've been alive, and he still can't speak English.
Yeah.
He said, "You two superstars, I think you're so special you don't have to kayfabe." And I said, "Dominic, I don't know who this lady kayfabe is." And he went to smack me again, and I covered my hands up. I said, "Why do you keep hitting me?" And he said, "You don't know what kayfabe is?" He said, it means get the fuck away from the guy you're working with. There's an outsider in the dressing room.
Right.
And that's how Mick Foley and I learned what kayfabe meant.
God, and kayfabe has many different connotations. You can be sitting there and have a conversation, hey, kayfabe. Or, just and to the point, your story. Kayfabe can be an adjective, it can be a verb, it can be a noun.
That's right.
You're smarter than I am. It can be many things. So, but you're doing this local stuff. I'm assuming you're working as a babyface.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the business back then. If you were a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, you were going to be a babyface. The idea of a heel looking like that didn't exist in those days.
This is the Steve Austin Show.
Hi, I'm Jessie Prey.
And I'm Andy Cassette. Welcome to Love Murder, where we unravel the darkest tales of romance turned deadly.
Our episodes are long-form, narrative-driven, and deeply researched. Perfect for the true crime aficionados seeking stories beyond the headlines.
Like the chilling case of Blanche Taylor Moore, the so-called Black Widow who left a trail of poisoned lovers.
Or the shocking murders of Chad Shelton and Dwayne Johnson, where family ties masked a sinister plot.
Subscribe to Love Murder on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Okay, let's go to UWF, because you probably learned a lot from Bill Watts. I would imagine your stay there wasn't too long, and also how connected or how close did you become to Eddie Gilbert at this time?
Well, Eddie Gilbert's actually getting a break in the business. Dominic had called. He was good friends with Bill Watts, and Bill was trying to go national at the time with the UWF to compete with Vince, as Vince launched the WWF. And so Dominic started running shows up in this area, and he sent a hell of a crew up. He sent Chris Adams, who Eddie Gilbert, Terry Taylor, Missing Link, Buddy Roberts, Bill Irwin, I was going to say Scott Irwin, Bill Irwin, and Dark Journey and Missy Hyatt. So sent a hell of a crew up, and they worked the second half of the show. And we opened up the show with Dominic's students. And one of the last days, Terry Taylor and Eddie Gilbert pulled me and Mick Foley aside out back at Clarksburg, West Virginia, in the Armory there, the Nathan Goff Arena, and said, had you ever thought about being professional wrestlers? And I'm sure you were much like we were. We never thought we were good enough to be professional wrestlers. It was okay to goof around locally, but we weren't that good.
Right.
And Eddie had ended up calling me about 2 weeks later, which coincided with the time that I graduated from college, and my school loans were coming due. I had about 2 months left of my deferment on my school loans. I didn't have any way to begin to paying them back, and the economy was sucking at the time. So I packed the car up and I went. Mick was supposed to come in with me, but right afterward, Bill, I literally got in right as they closed the door because Bill put on a hiring freeze. Bill Watts, that is, put on a hiring freeze. He was having financial trouble, and that's what he had subsequently have to sell the company for, and Mick ended up getting frozen out and had to go another route, but he was supposed to be right behind me, and so Eddie played a huge part in the early part of my career.
Well, how long were you there in the UWF?
It was a little over a year. When I left there, the NWA had called, and Brad and trying to think. No, I was there to the end of the UWF. It was about a year, and Jim Crockett had bought it, and there was a momentous night or non-momentous night or whatever the adjective would be, that they had the NWA come down. It was in the UNO, University of New Orleans, where the NWA wrestlers were pitted against the UWF wrestlers, and all the UWF wrestlers were squashed out except for Sting and Steiner, who had deals with Crockett to go in to the NWA.
What did you think about the Dark Journey Missy Hyatt matches back in the day? Because, dude, I had just started getting Mid-South and Power Pro Wrestling, and then it went UWF, and like you said, it quickly folded. But, dude, those were some of the most because those were like cat fights. And yes, those girls were awesome. And I'd like to think that those girls were a big part of drawing some of those houses. That was a hot angle.
Absolutely. The fans ate it up because you had two damn good-looking girls. that were built like brick shithouses, both of them. And, they'd go out there, and you're right, they'd yank each other's hair and, throw each other around that ring. And
what did you think about Bill Watts?
Looking back, and even at the time, I remember the first night I worked in UWF, I came back to the curtain. I worked with Eddie Gilbert the first night on TV. And I came back to the curtain, and Bill was standing there a little bit to the left of the dressing room door. And I walked to the curtain, and he's got his hands on his hips. Bill's a pretty big, imposing guy. As I walked towards the dressing room door, I went to walk past him, and he said, "What the fuck was that?" And I stopped dead in my tracks, not sure if he was ribbing me. My thinking at that moment was he was ribbing me. Like, my first night in, I'm going to get ribbed. And so I looked at him and I gave him this little nervous grin, ready to say something. And Stevie came at me like a dog to a bone, and pinned me against the wall, screaming at me. And I was pissed off and scared, but the level of his voice, I thought he was going to come to get my back and get out on fire. He was pretty hot.
What was he hot about?
Well, I started listening to what he was saying. He wasn't just yelling to yell. He was yelling, "You never turn your back on your opponent. You don't do this, and find a goddamn camera." He was yelling directions at me.
Right.
And I picked up on that pretty quickly. And so from that point forward, I knew sort of how to stay out of Bill's way and to not get his wrath. And any time he came at me like that, I paid attention. We all make a million mistakes. I tried like hell not to make any of them twice. That was the big thing with Bill.
All right, you're over in the Mid-South Territory. Bill Watts is running it. You're a white meat babyface. You're a prime candidate for someone to get some heat on. So
sure.
I'm imagining you took your fair shellackins in. My question is, when you go to wrestling school like I did, Chris Adams taught me how to take a bump, taught me to do a little bit of chain wrestling, and how to tumble. What he didn't teach me was how to make a blade. I would imagine that at some point in Mid-South, you got busted open. Am I correct?
A couple times, not many. A couple times, but it was always hard way in Mid-South.
Okay. Well, I heard a lot of that was going on. And, dude, and you know better than anybody, Bill loved big guys. I was a big guy territory. But also, guys like yourself, blonde, blue-eyed, good-looking guys get some heat on, or as babyface. And, of course, rock and roll was extremely successful there when they went there. But back to the task at hand. If it wasn't a hard way, who taught you how to make your first blade?
Eddie Gilbert in Continental. We were wrestling in Birmingham out at the fairgrounds because the Boutwell Arena was being renovated at that point. And he came to me, and this is when they first started doing the Lord Humongous, Shane Douglas Dean Cousins, which is Sid Vicious, obviously. And he had started the storyline and had been playing it. We didn't really know where it was going. He hadn't yet revealed that Sid was supposed to be my cousin. And there was a match one night where he set it up to where Sid got to the building late, and I was going to be out there wrestling the Moondogs. And we were going to forfeit the match, and I said, "No, I'll go out and wrestle it myself." And went out, and he's telling me in the back, you would drink some whiskey beforehand, you got to take a whole bunch of aspirin, you got to do this, got to do that. And he showed me how to make it. And so I got the first time not having any idea what I'm doing, and had a bloodbath out there. I'm running up and down the hall before the match, I get my blood flowing, and a young and dumb kid, and bled like a stuck pig out there.
So how was that first go-around? I remember one time, I think I was wrestling. Someone asked me this question the other day, was I ever a guy who took some aspirin? And that's the big thing with the aspirin is it thins your blood so it lets you bleed a little bit easier. Your blood doesn't coagulate as quick or clot up, whatever the deal is. So anyway, I took about 4 aspirin on an empty stomach. Boy, you talk about a gut bomb. And that night, Shane, I had made my blade a little bit too long. By the time I went to go get some color, and this is on pay-per-view, I mean, I couldn't get in. And so basically, at the end of the match, I had a little bit of color, and it looked like a chicken had got on my forehead and just kind of peeled out. You talk about pissed off, and because I was mad at myself for not making a great blade. But it really is an interesting activity to partake in. If obviously most of the people who listen to this show have never gotten color, and I would never recommend you to do so. But you make that hatchet, and with a good point on it, and always drug with the grain, And, you know, when you first pop that thing in, you hear that kind of little pop or maybe a little gristle or it's just breaking that tissue, and then you just a little drag, and then boom, there you go. And it was funny because, you know, Shane, back in the day, you being as smart as you were, almost going to medical school, back in, you know, the early 80s, you know, you don't even question the safety factor of swapping blood with another guy in a ring. I mean, it was almost, you did it with honor because, you know, you were trying to facilitate an angle, get somebody hot, get your angle hot, make the story more interesting than it was already going to be, to add this color because it's like coloring a picture. That red, you know, can really mean something. So out of all the times you got color, did it ever bother you? Because I always, whenever I got the green light to get it, I was always game to do it.
Yeah. I think to myself, like, this is, like, as I've been making the blade, like, the fuck are you doing? You know, it seemed like a million miles away, but I was anything I've ever done in my life, and I'm sure you're the same way, most guys that ascend in the business, I think, have the same ethic. If you commit to something, you commit to 1,000%. And so if I was going to be a wrestler, by God, I was going to be the best damn wrestler I could be. I wasn't going to be half-assed, or if I wasn't any good, I wasn't going to stick around. I just always wanted to be the best at whatever I did. And the way we came up in the business, that's how we did business. And, you know, like you said, it was almost with a thought of honor. It never bothered me until, I would say, right around the time of ECW, when it was becoming so egregious that to me it was just getting, there was no point to it. It was like, you know, there's air in the room. Okay, well, there's blood in the ring in ECW. It didn't really much matter. And it didn't elevate the match. As I was watching them from the dressing room, I'd watch the monitor, and I wouldn't see what I thought should evoke a response in the crowd.
Right.
I wasn't seeing that. So I made a conscious decision there to not do it. And it was the first time I remember thinking to myself, you know, this is several years after the whole AIDS thing started, which happened right around the outset of my career, thinking to myself, like, this isn't safe. You know, there's another guy bleeding, and so I sort of commenced in ECW that if I was going to bleed in the ring that night, that nobody else would in the match with me, you know, because it was going to be me or nobody. And, you know, it's funny how the ECW fans now, looking back at it, how they hold such reverence for it, because I remember at the time I took a ton of heat. You know, the fans said, oh, you're a pussy, you're afraid. It had nothing to do with that. It meant nothing. And if I was going to do it, if I was going to disfigure myself, you know, I was going to sure as hell make sure it made sense and evoke some response in the audience. I didn't want to just do it to do it. You know, I never endeavored to have the dusty forehead. You know, I wanted to, people always talk about leaving a good-looking corpse. Now I have the thought that I don't leave an old dried-up, hideous corpse behind, but I certainly didn't want the hamburger forehead.
I never really understood, you know, with, I guess Dusty was a guy who did some vertical cutting. You know, Abby certainly did. I never did understand the guys who went vertical. It was big in Puerto Rico as well, kind of a regional thing. Man, the way, you know, the skin on your forehead is, go with the grain, and it's going to scar less. And so, you know, and again, you can look at my forehead today, and I got color on several occasions. I got fortunate to have good skin, make good cuts, and it is what it is. But I just, the idea is as interesting with the slight bit of pain that goes with the horizontal, the vertical, has got to be times 10. It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, same here. I never got it. We had a kid one time, and this is way back before I even got my break in UWF. We're wrestling in a place called Poco, West Virginia. And the reason I remember it so well is on the high school gymnasium wall, they had their mascot, which was the polka dots. P-O-C-A dots.
Jesus Christ.
You know, you need to find something a little bit more intimidating than a polka dot. But there was a kid named Irish Mike McGee who wanted to cut that night, wanted a blade. And Dominic looked at him like he was nuts. There were like 100, 150 people in the audience. What the fuck's the matter with you? And he told him no. He said, you can't use a blade. So we're getting ready to go to the ring, and he's digging through the garbage can. This is back in the day when they still had the pull tabs on the beer cans and pop cans. He's digging through the garbage and found a pop tab. Beer tab, pop tab, whichever one it was.
Yeah.
And took that to the ring and scarred himself up with. And I remember him saying in the dressing room with me and Mick and the rest of us in Dominic's school, you know, I want to have that forehead. And I go, well, geez, man, not necessarily my thinking, but, you know, apparently some do.
So he wanted to look like a grizzled vet.
Yeah.
Dude, the key is, my goal was always to be a pro wrestler, and I didn't know what heights I would take it to. I just want to be a pro wrestler. But that being said, I knew I wasn't getting into a ballet session for 15 years. Probably going to feel a little bit rough, but other than that, I just wanted to be a wrestler. I didn't necessarily, of course, I went through the fanny pack stage. I went through the clutch bag phase. I went through all the phases that the boys go through, but just coming out looking like a wrestler with the carved up forehead wasn't on my list of things to do.
Yeah, mine either, Steve. I just, like I said, I try not to sit back and judge people. Who knows what's going through their head. Like Dusty, in his case, I know that became part of his gimmick, that he was going to bleed, and same thing with Abdullah.
And don't get me wrong, man, when I speak of Dusty, I got nothing but respect for him. Everybody thought he was a little bit heavy set, man, or someone even be so bold as to call him fat. I ain't going to do that. Yeah. I'm just saying, I love Dusty Rhodes. He's one of my favorites of all time. And so, I expected color out of Dusty. And then I think it was Dusty that was wrestling in the ring in the Houston Coliseum when I saw my first wrestling match and fell in love with the business, and he was bleeding then. But I got nothing but respect for that guy. Shane, how long were you in the business before you really felt, you know what, hey, I got this? And at the babyface level now, but from ring psychology, guy calling you a match, or if you're calling to a younger guy, when did you really feel you were a solid mechanic and could accomplish the task at hand? You had good fire, you could sell, you had good offense, and you had the whole game put together.
It's sort of embarrassing to say because it took me about 7 years. I would say it was about my 7th year where I started really feeling in command. Now that said, the first 3.5 of that I was, working just locally on the weekends and stuff. But about my 7th year in is when I still, to this day, get the butterflies before a match to go out and, give a good performance, that sort of thing. But back then I would get really wound up before a match until about 7 years in, and then I started feeling comfortable going to the ring that I could handle it, that I knew what was coming, and that I could, if something went wrong in the ring, I could fix it and get back to it. But I'd say about 7 years. How long for you?
No, man, I think I'm right along there with you. I gravitated to it pretty well. Once I got the repetition in and got into a weekly territory like USWA, because, dude, when you're working 5-6 days a week and you're in the same towns over and over again, you got to change everything up all the time. And you're working with established veterans that got 10, 15 years in the business. And, after that, you're riding down the roads and you're picking their brain and listening to all the stories. And so, your brain is like a sponge. But I would really kind of go along those same lines with you, that 5 to 7 year mark. By the time I had got into WWF, making my short run through ECW, when I got there and they lit me up, first with the ringmaster, but when they switched me to Stone Cold, when I came up with that gimmick, that was kind of like, it was almost like Savage had spent so long in the minor leagues learning the craft and the trade that when he went to WWF, they just put a rocket on his back and he was ready to go. So I kind of felt like, I'd been in the business 7.5 years, pretty pissed off, big chip on the shoulder. But that, I was ready for anything that they could throw me at that time. And, I had started off working babyface and then switched heel, which I enjoyed so much more than working babyface. Shane, do you have another hour to talk with me?
I do have, yes.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to wrap this conversation up right now with Shane Douglas, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to run through some NWA stuff, some WCW stuff. We're going to talk about skateboards, a brief stint in WWF, and some ECW stuff, and bring it back full circle. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm coming back to wrap this show up. Next week, we will continue with Shane Douglas, the franchise.
The Steve Austin Show. The Steve Austin Show.
Love listening to this podcast? I love that you're here to listen. Do you ever wonder what it's like to create a listening experience like this week to week? Do your friends always tell you that you should have a podcast? Well, now is your chance. Our podcast network, PodcastOne, is looking for the next podcast star. Think it could be you? Enter the Self-Made Podcast competition now to find out. All you have to do is visit launchpad1.com/selfmade for a chance to win a contract with PodcastOne, valued at over $100,000 in promotion and so much more. Enter now until September 3rd and tell all of your friends to listen and download. Go Go to launchpad1.com/selfmade to find out more, see official rules, and sign up for your chance to win. That's launchpad1.com/selfmade.
Looking forward to you guys hearing the back end of the conversation as it comes up next Thursday. And once again, thanks to Shane for doing a podcast. And it's good to be back in touch with the guy. It's been a long time since I've talked to him, and thank you for being so candid and very open with his struggles with oxycodone, one that he has beaten and overcome. So congrats to him for that, and much respect. With that being said, let's move on down the road as we continue the process to close this thing down. I can't close it down until I give you a word of the day. And I was thinking about the word of the day, and I always try to go above and beyond the call of duty when I come up with these words, but it really gets hard because, you know, some of the cool words that I had in the beginning, it's just hard to find them. Sometimes I think, well, let's try to go the scientific route. And you know what? I couldn't go scientific on this one, and I found the silver lining in the cloud just by going back to my first story, and it's a true story about having gas, not being able to fart in the house. So I went over to the Urban Dictionary, where I get a lot of my definitions from, and I just typed in the word fart. It's got 261 different names for a fart. So I'll give you a couple of them while I got the microphone running and in my hand. A fart it could be also a one-man salute, anal acoustics, anal audio, an ass blaster, an ass biscuit, ass thunder, or how about a ass whistle? How about this one? A turd whistling for a turd whistling for the right of way, backdoor breeze, a little backfire, bacon brownies, a bean blower, the belch from behind, blast off, blasting the ass trumpet, blow ass, blow mud, blow the big brown horn, blowing the butt bugle. Hershey the Wonder Dog just came over. What's happening, Hershey? Been talking about you the last few podcasts. The bun shaker, burning rubber, busting ass, the old cheek flapper, crack a rat, crack one off, crack splitters, cut loose, cut the cheese, cut the wind. Here's one, death breath. That's the ones I was cutting the other day at the house that got me such a strong reaction from my wife. The death breath. Drop ass, drop the bomb, empty my tank, fire a stink torpedo, fizzler, flamethrower, flatulate, flapper, float an air biscuit, the old fog slicer, the foul howl, flagrant fuzzy, gas blaster, gas master, ghost turd, I like that one, gravy pants, the great brown cloud, the heinous anus, hole flapper, insane and the methane, just calling your name, kaboom, K-fart, kill the canary, here's one, lay a wind loaf, lay an air biscuit, leave a gas trap, let each little bean be heard, let one go, I've let a bunch go, let one fly, let the beans out. So who let the beans out? Made a gas blast, made a stink. Shades of, what's his name? A mud duck, moon gas, nose death, odor bubble, odorama, the one-man jazz band, paint stainer, panty burp. Pass gas, pass wind, play the tuba, play in the trouser tuba, Papa Fluffy, quack, a rectal honk, a rectal shout, a rectal trimmer, release a squeaker, release an ass biscuit, rim shot, rip ass, rip one, ripple fart, roast the jockeys. God damn it, I don't know where they come up with these things. Shit vapor, shoot the cannon, shopping at wall fart, silent but deadly. We all know that one. Singing the anal anthem. Sounds like a wampus cat. Now, if it was a cattywampus cat, you really got trouble. A sphincter song. Spit a brick. Spit one out. Step on a duck. Step on a frog. Stink bomb. Stink burger. Strangling the stank monkey. Stress release. Tailwind. That felt good. The closest you get to crabbing while standing up. The colonic calliope. The dog did it. The F-bomb. The stink's gone into the fabric. The third state of matter. And the toothless one speaks. And I'm going to end on that one right there. The toothless one speaks. That's my word of the day, and I guess it's basically some words that you could call a fart or whatever you want to do with them. You got to think, Steve, you ain't the youngest cat in the world. You're certainly not the oldest, and you're still talking about farting and bullshit and all the stupid shit that you talk about. And yes, I do, because I don't give a flying shit how old I am. I have a good time out here. You know what? God damn it, reminds me of that old George Strait song, Here for a Good Time, and when he sings there in the chorus, I ain't here for a long time, I'm here for a good time, and that's all I got to say about that shit. Hey, let's wrap this thing up. I got some badass T-shirts over at the website, BrokenSkullRanch.com and ProWrestlingTees.com. Got koozies, all kinds of shit like that. Keep your drink cold, keep your hand warm. Guys, gals, I appreciate you hitting the download button each and every single week. Tell a couple of buddies about the show because we're cheap as a motherfucker. We ain't got no advertising budget, and that's the goddamn truth, and it is the bottom line. I got a Tuesday family-friendly show, and you got the Thursday Unleashed show, which you're listening to right now. If you subscribe to each show, 2 separate feeds, you'll get them both. You'll never miss a goddamn thing. Hey, if you want to support the show, the best way you can do that is to use my Amazon links. Because Amazon, when you shop on there, they don't charge you nothing extra. There's no hidden cost, no bullshit like that. They're not trying to fuck you. But if you want to support the show, because we do got bills to pay over at PodcastOne, you got to have the lights on. Stacy, have all them people to put them shows together. They got to get paid. They got those gimmicks come to their mailbox just like you and I do. They call bills. If you want to help us pay them while you're shopping for something for yourself, and remember, there ain't no hidden fees, and you want to help this brother out, all you got to do is go to PodcastOne.com. Click on the Keep Our Podcast Free banner, then find the Steve Austin Show button and click on that motherfucker, and it'll take you to all my Amazon links. Amazon USA, Amazon UK, Amazon Canada. Shop to your heart's content if you're going to buy something. I'm not telling you to buy nothing that you don't need. Money is too hard to come by these days. Hey, but if you use those Amazon links, they'll kick back a few ducats to the show and help us pay our production costs. Hey, folks, anyway, my name is Steve Austin. I'm coming to you from 316 Gimmick Street. I hope you have a badass, wonderful weekend. Watch out for idiots on the road. And until the next time, I will catch your ass down the road.
Download new episodes of Steve Austin Unleashed every Thursday at PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
Pluto TV is playing the biggest movies every night this summer, for free. Watch hit movies like The Matrix, G.I. Joe Retaliation, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Scary Movie, Runaway Bride, and more all summer long. Check out the biggest stars like The Rock, Keanu Reeves, Tom Cruise, Julia Roberts, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and more. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of free TV channels in English and Spanish featuring TV shows, news, sports, comedy, and more, all for free. Download the free Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device, including Android and Apple smartphones. Pluto TV. Drop in. Watch free.
Hey guys, Jay Cutler. Started a new podcast called Uncut with Jay Cutler. Most of you know me from the NFL, some of you have seen me on Instagram, and some of you know me from the reality TV world. Each week I'm taking you along with me as we discuss football, trending topics, and whatever's going on in my life each week. I'm bringing along people that are special in my life. Former teammates, friends, and some new people that I like and respect. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Podcasting? I think I'm doing this right. Can't wait to get started with you. Go subscribe now. Uncut with Jay Cutler, Apple Podcasts, PodcastOne, and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Just when you thought summer couldn't get any hotter, Pluto TV is turning up the heat with thousands of free movies. Presenting Summer of Cinema. Stream your favorite blockbuster films like Gladiator.
I will have my vengeance.
Good Burger.
This is what I call fast food.
Beverly Hills Cop. The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, and Julie and Julia.
Bon appetit!
All for free on your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.